Good morning, geometry scholars. This is Mrs. Murphy.
And this is Miss Talhami.
Greeting you to the second week of online learning. We're hopeful the first week went smoothly for you. Each day, just like when we were in class, we will have our learning target. Today's learning target is for us to be able to determine if a pair of lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So let's recall some of the things that you have either learned with us or in previous classes about what parallel slopes look like and what perpendicular slopes look like. Look at the word parallel. I always like to circle the two L's in the middle because those two L's are exactly what parallel lines look like. They're lines with the same slope. They never touch, no matter how far we keep those lines going. Do you recall where to find the slope when you look at the equation of a line? The slope is the number in front of the x. It's that m value. So if you see two lines that have the same m value, then you can tell that those two lines are parallel. Let's look at an example. Let's make one up. How about y equals 2x plus 7 as our first line. And our second line, y equals 2x minus 4. Notice the value in front of the x for both equations is a 2. Therefore, we can determine that this pair of lines is parallel. You can pause this video as needed if you would like to write down notes. Now we're going to go on to perpendicular slopes. So perpendicular slopes make what I think looks like a T, a capital T, upside down. Perpendicular slopes make right angles, and they are opposite reciprocals of each other. Let's think about those two words, opposite, reciprocal. Opposite meaning opposite signs. One would be positive, one would be negative. Remember flip. That means you're going to flip the slope. Let's talk how to flip a number. The reciprocal of a half would be 2 over 1. The reciprocal of a whole number like 5 would be 1 over 5. Because we can't forget that a whole number really has a 1 underneath it. Okay, so with that knowledge, let's make two examples of a pair of lines with perpendicular slopes. So line 1, y equals 5x minus 2 is perpendicular to y equals, okay, now let's take that 5, make it the opposite sign. Right now it's a positive, so it will become a negative slope. And we're going to flip the 5. The 5 is really over a 1, so it will become 1 over 5. That is the opposite reciprocal. Y equals negative 1/5 x plus 9. All the other numbers don't matter. All we're focusing in is on the slope.
So let's come up with another example. How about this, Miss Murphy? Why don't we say y equals negative 2/3 x plus 4. Do you think you could come up with an equation of a line perpendicular? Think about it. What do you think, Miss Murphy?
I know I'm looking just at the slope, so I'm going to keep the y equals the same. I'm going to change the negative to a positive and flip the 2/3 to a 3/2 with the x next to the slope. And then any other number could follow, plus 7. So perpendicular slopes are opposite reciprocals. That's a fact to memorize. So for those of you who like to make flashcards, you can make a flashcard that says slope, parallel slopes, parallel lines, should have the same slopes. And another card that says perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. Those are 2 facts for memorization. So as we continue on trying some of these examples, we're going to have to find the slope in order to analyze them and figure out then if the 2 slopes are parallel or perpendicular. Okay, so think for a minute, what's the slope formula? Some of us remember it as the change in y over the change in x, where we subtract the 2 y's and we put them over the difference of the 2 x's. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay, so I would start on letter A by labeling my points as x1, y1. And the second point is x2, y2. And carry it right through to the second point. Let's label all our points at once. Or not.
Sorry, Miss Murphy.
Right
I'll get to the next one.
That's fine. That's fine. We're going to just go right into applying the formula. So we have 1 minus 2 over 3 minus 1. Now, some of you using your graphing calculator might go directly to alpha y equals and put that in as a fraction. We'll give you a second to do that. Some of you may just calculate this in your head. That's how I do it. I do 1 minus 2 is negative 1 over 3 minus 1 is 2. So my slope is negative a half. The whole slope is negative. Okay, and we're going to go to the second 2 points and do the same. Label. Substitute into the formula. y2 minus y1. Look at that double negative Mrs. Talhami wrote there. Double negative. Be very careful of that. And then 2 minus 0. Remember, whenever we subtract a negative, it really is add a positive. So if you're going to rely on your brain to calculate this, you would really be saying 0 plus 1 is 1. Over 2 take away nothing is 2. And that's the slope for the second pair of points. So let's compare these slopes. One is negative and one is positive. So they're not the same slopes. So they're not parallel lines. But they're also not reciprocals of each other. Therefore, they also cannot be perpendicular. So these points create lines that are neither. Okay, so just let's stop for a second and review some of the things that your brain should be clear about. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Check for your understanding. Do you know the symbol for parallel? Mrs. Talhami, could you highlight the symbol for parallel?
Sure.
Thank you. Do you know the symbol for perpendicular?
That's over here.
Okay. Do you know the slope formula? That's the knowledge you need to help answer these questions. Parallel lines have the same slope. Perpendicular lines are opposite reciprocals. Excellent. And lucky for us, we have some more sample practice problems. Now, what I would suggest is pausing the video at this point and try to look at L1 in exercise B. Before Mrs. Talhami writes this, see if you could try it on a separate sheet of paper. When you're done, compare it to what's going to be written for you. See you in a minute. Okay, so hopefully you labeled your points as x1, y1, x2, y2. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1 equals 1 take away 3 is negative 2. 3 take away nothing is 3. And that's our slope for the first 2 points. Negative 2/3. Do the same for the second set of points. Label. And substitute. Negative 5 minus 4 over negative 7 minus a negative 1. Being careful of that double negative. Equals negative 5 minus 4 is negative 9 over negative 7 plus 1 is negative 6.
Miss Murphy, do we need to reduce this?
Always reduce where possible. Remembering that a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So I'm looking at 9 and 6 and I realize that they both can be divided by 3. 9 divided by 3 is 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2. We drop the negatives because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Now, you don't have to know all of those facts to do this because if you used your alpha y equals key and put that fraction in numerator and denominator all at once, your calculator would have given you 3/2 as a final answer. Let's compare these two answers. One is positive, one is negative, so we have opposites. And now let's ask ourselves, do we have reciprocals? Yes, we do. One is flipped. Recip, flip. We have opposite reciprocals, so these make perpendicular lines. Opposite reciprocal slopes mean that our lines are perpendicular. Hopefully this is becoming easier for you at this point. All right, so we're going to move a little more quickly now. Again, pause the video if you want to get good practice in between. -7 minus -1. 5 minus 2. Whenever I subtract a negative, it really means add a positive. So it's going to be -6/3, which reduces to -2/1, or just -2. I like to keep my slopes as a fraction, Ms. Talhami. So can we put a 1 over that?
Sure,
Thank
Miss
you.
Murphy.
I know when I have to count my slope, I'm going to go down 2/1. We'll apply the same method to the second point.
Miss Murphy, when we have a negative, does it matter if the negative is in front, like that first slope that says -2/1, or in the second slope where it says 2/-1?
Great question. Whenever we have a negative next to a fraction, it doesn't matter whether the negative is in the numerator, the denominator, or just in front. It simply means that the whole slope is negative. So when we would draw a line, a negative line, remember it looks like the middle of a capital N for negative. Goes from the top right down to the bottom left. That's a negative slope. The whole slope is negative. So clearly here, Ms. Talhami, we do not have opposite signs, nor do we have reciprocals, but what we do have is exactly the same slopes. Same slopes means that we have parallel lines. Parallel lines have the same slope. Again, pause the video, work on letter D and E, and compare your answers to what you will see.
Miss Murphy,
Whoa.
what does that mean?
A 0 in the numerator.
Can we put that in our calculator?
Yeah, I wonder what would happen. I mean, I look at that as nothing over 1. So that means that it's no slope.
So when I put 0 divided by 1 in my calculator, it actually gives me a 0. So does that mean my slope is 0?
Yes, it does.
Wonderful.
That's the kind of line that's no fun. It's 0 fun. If you were to go sleigh riding on a slope, if it was a 0 slope, well, you're not going anywhere fast unless someone's pushing you, because that's pretty flat.
So you're telling me a slope of 0 looks something like this, Miss Murphy?
Yeah. Not too fun to sleigh ride or ski on that.
No.
I like how Mrs. Talhami puts the negative in parentheses just to really make sure you're seeing it's a double negative. Again, we have a -5 plus 5. Ooh, a 0 on the top. -15 on the bottom. When 0 is in the numerator, the whole slope is 0. We have the same slope for both sets of points. Same slope means you got it. Parallel lines. Excellent. You should be feeling pretty confident at this point. Point.
Even
You
though
can do this.
even though we're in distance learning, our humor does not change.
No. By the way, we miss seeing you all. It would be a lot better if we were together to do this. And having you come up to the board and share your knowledge with us.
Miss Murphy, when I put 2 divided by 0 in my calculator, I get an error. What does that mean?
ERROR. What did we call that when 0 was in the denominator? I'll give you a hint. It begins with UN. Maybe you could draw a bunch of dashes. UN dash 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 dash.
I think I'm missing one dash.
One more. Can you think of that word? When 0 is in the denominator, it is that's right, defined. Undefined. Here's that DE. Let's circle that DE. That's like death. If you try to go skiing on an undefined slope, you're gonna, I don't know what you'd call that.
You can't ski on a line like that.
No, it's undefined. There's a perfectly vertical line.
I don't know. Look at that, Miss Murphy.
Another undefined slope.
So what does that mean?
If they're both undefined, does that mean they're both the same as Talhami?
Yeah, they're both vertical slopes.
Therefore, they are parallel lines. Hopefully you can spell parallel correctly at this point. It's on the list of the most commonly misspelled words in America.
Is it so?
Parallel, yeah.
Interesting. I always remember because the parallel symbol is there, like you said earlier.
Yeah. Is it possible for 2 lines with negative slopes to be perpendicular? Explain why or why not. So let's go back to our definition of what perpendicular even means. Perpendicular lines must have opposite reciprocal slopes. So if they're both negative, are they both opposite? I think not.
Yeah, opposite is your key word there, Miss Murphy. If they're both negative, then they are not opposite signs.
And therefore, they are not perpendicular. Remembering that word explain means you must use words, not just a yes or no response, words to explain why or why not you came up with your answer. So we really should have written no to answer the question and then our explanation. There we go.
Great. So at this point, you should understand the difference between the slopes of lines that are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. You should understand the process. If you have any questions, you should go to the discussion page for week 2 and make sure you ask a question there. Myself or Miss Murphy will answer it as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Good luck.